If you have 50,000 APIs, you probably have 500,000 endpoints, right? So it's a lot. If you are a human developer, you search for APIs and then you write your application. With agents, that's much more a runtime thing. So you have an agent that discovers it needs to do something, and then it needs to find the tools in order to do that thing. Where you don't just look for APIs when you're writing an app, you kind of look for APIs every time you solve a problem.
Today, our guest is Erik Wilde, Head of Enterprise Strategy at Jentic. Erik is a legend in the API space. He's had monumental impact of how many of us think about API design, governance, and digital evolution today. He's been working in APIs for well over 15 years across academia, consulting, and enterprise software. Erik spent many years at Axway, where he worked closely with some of the largest organizations in the world on API strategy and governance. Today, he's an OAI Ambassador at the OpenAPI Initiative, runs his own YouTube channel, Getting APIs to Work, and continues to help organizations align APIs, business capabilities, and real-world outcomes. At Jentic, Erik is now focused on a question that a lot of teams are struggling with. How do you make large, complex API landscapes actually work in an AI-driven world without breaking everything you already have? In our conversation, we're going to get into why API design and governance still matters more than ever, especially in the age of AI, what AI-ready APIs actually mean and what most teams get wrong, and why many AI projects fail before they even get started. If you've ever worked with APIs at scale, struggled with governance, or wondered how AI really fits into existing enterprise systems, you'll enjoy this one. Before we jump in, don't forget to subscribe here on YouTube and follow our show in your favorite podcasting app. All of our episodes are available as audio versions on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and more. Links are in the description. With that, I bring you Erik Wilde. And we're live. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another episode of The Good Thing. Today, we have a very special guest, Erik Wilde, from the Head of Enterprise Strategy at Jentic. Erik, you told me to say angry. How are you doing today?
I am cheerful and energetic.
Okay, that was smooth. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, Jens. Jens, how are you doing today?
I'm good, thanks. And just a question to kick us off, Erik. So somehow, for a lot of people, APIs are insanely boring, but for people like us, it's I don't know. We're reinventing the same things over and over again. And just curious, like how did you stay in this space for so long, and what drives you?
Yeah, it's a good question, right? So at some point I have to add up my API days, and yes, I'll be in Paris, of course. I've probably been to 40 API days events. At least that's what it feels like. I'm not sure, but to many, many, many. And I mean, by now, to be honest, right, like in most cases, I actually don't really go to presentations because in most cases, there's not that much to learn, right? Most of them I've heard in some shape or form. So for me, it's interesting just to go there and listen to what are people working on, what do they see as their problems, what do they run into, what do they see as things that they think, really should become something that somebody builds a product for, or these kind of things. So for me now, the most interesting part really is to just better understand what people are trying to get done, what they perceive as things that are not there, or that they don't work as well as they should, and then walking away with that kind of deeper insight into what people actually try to get done. And there's always something that you learn at API days, right? Like by now, in most cases, not really from the presentations, right, but from the conversations that you have. And it's going to be Paris is going to be huge, right? It's even bigger now than it was last year, and it was pretty big last year. So a lot of conversations there. So that's what I'll do.
So you experienced the dotcom bubble, and I hear from time to time, and it's getting more people talking about the AI bubble, and I'm just curious. Do you see any patterns, any parallels where things happen that happened in the past, and how do you see, or what are your thoughts on people talking about AI bubbles and such, and yeah, how do you think about it in the context of history?
in the context of history? That's a very light question. Yeah, I mean, I think it's clear that it's a bubble, right? Like it's gonna be ugly. There's going to be companies that will not fare well. But I think, I mean, the dot-com bubble, I think in my mind was very similar, right? I mean, some companies just did insane things because it was possible, and lots of them disappeared. Not all of them, right? So kind of the landscape was shaken up a little bit, but by and large, right, a lot of the stuff that the dot-com bubble created, it's just like the whole momentum of the web and like a whole landscape of new things that people were able and willing to do through the internet. I mean, that has definitely changed the world as we know it and as it came out afterwards. And I think the AI bubble will not be all that different, right? There will be definitely some things that will be shaken up, but yeah, my bet, that's why I joined Jentic, right? So I have a new job now for the last 2 months, and we're kind of working a little bit, not totally, let's say, in AI land, but also betting a little bit on that AI land at least won't completely disappear. And that's good enough for me, because that's what I think will happen. We'll see kind of an adjustment of things where, like, this over enthusiasm that all you need is AI, right? That will, I think, will go away. But there will be, I mean, there definitely are useful things that you can do with AI, and we will continue to do them. So, and that's good enough for me, and I hope it's good enough for Jentic, but I'm pretty sure it is.
Yeah, but this got me curious, because so assuming that you are a smart guy working for Axway for so long, and then you're making a change, and also knowing, like what you just said, in the dot-com bubble, only those companies survived that really had created or had a way of actually capturing value or providing something that was not just hype, but there was like real substance. So I'm curious, in your new position at Gentic, and with all your API background, like what is the substance that you see in this company, and how do you think that will survive through that bubble?
Well, thanks for letting me do our pitch here, even encouraging me to do it.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Good,
so I
good
mean,
question, Jens.
the reason why I joined, right, was very clearly that our mission basically is to make API landscapes better useful or better usable for AI, right? But for anybody, not just for AI. Basically, just help also with AI, but with everything else as well. And not that we will ever use that as our official slogan, but my main reason for joining was actually that I think what we do is kind of allows you to do as little AI as possible, right? By saying, for those things where AI creates value, it's good to use it. But for all the other things, just use deterministic code, right? Just use workflows. So we bet a lot on the idea of workflows, where the idea is that all the things that need to happen in a certain way should just happen in code, like in regular executable codes, let's say, and not in LLMs. And that kind of slider where you can adjust and say, I want a little bit of AI, but not really all that much. Also, because as we all know, right, like as soon as the AI bubble bursts, LLMs will become much more expensive, right? Like by now, tokens are way too cheap. So that will kill a lot of AI, right, by itself. And so I think it's natural that you will want to still use AI, but only when you have to. And I think that's where we are in a very good position by saying, like, whatever you can put into workflows that you can execute deterministically, do that, and then just have agents for the things where you really need that kind of open-ended creativity. And that's kind of our and my bet that this will be something that's useful, and it may even become more useful, because I think once we are past like the AI hump, right, and the bubble has burst, people will become more selective, right, and they they still will want to use some AI for some things because it is useful, but they also will say, yeah, but we don't want to use it for everything. So help me with that, please.
Yeah, I think if you look at the public information, what people post about OpenAI, I think the current take is that OpenAI they lose, or they spend $1 on, or you spend $1 on token, it costs them 3. So that kind of indicates that if something like Jentic should work in the future, even if token cost triples, it still needs to give a good enough return on invest for the user of such a software. So, like you said, the value must be there, and yeah, it's very interesting to see how that falls. On the other side, what you also see is, from, for example, open source models from China. They are becoming better and better. And then there's also the question with these open source models, and with bigger hardware deployments, there might also be an opportunity that open source models on good enough hardware that it could potentially also reduce token pricing. So I think, like, not all cards are dealt yet in this game, but it will be very interesting to see how all of this unfolds, because I would assume, like, there's many, like, side effects, when big players fall apart because consumers don't use that software anymore. It can have all sorts of effects, and yeah, we will need to see who survives that in the end, right?
It'll be exciting. So I mean, Axway is really kind of a very kind of traditional enterprise vendor, right? So life at Axway was relatively stable, right? So you have a very well established products which you develop a little bit further and stuff, but it's a relatively stable model where you know what to do and you know how to operate, and everybody has been doing that for quite a while, right? So that was good, but it's definitely different now. But I like that. I mean, I have not been part of a startup so far, so that was also a little bit, one of the reasons why I joined, where I thought, okay, that might be an interesting experience. As we all know, right? It's also, well, you don't know whether you're still going to exist a year from now, but that just makes things very different. And so far, I like it. It's more engaging. It's also a little bit more. Yeah, you can't really just kind of smooth sailing, right? So you always have to think a little bit harder and think about, okay, what are all the things we could be doing? What are the things we should be doing? What are the things that will give us the best bang for the buck? But I like that.
I did have one question. So, because I wanted to dive a little bit deeper into the startup versus traditional, big corporate giant. How has it been though? Like, so you're leading the enterprise strategy with Jentic. Just if you could, for the audience, kind of give a little bit of overview of like what that entails, because you are a startup. So how are you guys getting into these enterprises? How are these enterprises touching or trusting you with their enterprise strategy and things like that? So I'm kind of curious what you saw from Axway to here, and just kind of the differences between the two.
Yeah, so my role has been to figure that out. And I'm still doing that. But yeah, so right now what we're trying to do is really come up with a kind of a model where we provide like a relatively continuous on-ramp, right? Where we not just go and say, hey, everything's totally different, just buy Jentic and everything's going to be radically different, right? That's not going to work, in particular not when you're a startup, because large enterprises typically don't really deal with companies like that. So our strategy right now is, and it's kind of interesting because my title, you could read that two ways, right? It's both the internal strategy for us, but I also want to help enterprises externally with their strategy. So right now our plan is actually to really have like that smooth on-ramp. So we're starting with kind of very simple scoring services where we allow enterprises to just get an insight into their API landscape so they better understand how AI ready our APIs, right? So basically just scoring with a little bit of opinionated stuff in there, but really not all that fancy, but still some value already, right? Gives you some indication of where you are and where maybe you should invest a little bit. And then we have, like, past that, we make suggestions for improvements. We also provide ways of how organizations then can start building sandboxes for certain APIs so that they can more safely play around. So that has something that has resonated. There's something that has resonated very well, because in a lot of organizations, people are concerned with AI projects failing, right? There are all these reports that show very large numbers of AI projects failing. And I think there,
95%.
the MIT report.
Yes, exactly that one.
Yeah. And there are some reasons for that, right? I mean, it's not like we have the magic wand that would make all of these succeed. But I think you can at least read through some of these, make up your mind, and maybe also help organizations with some opinions of your own, where you say, look, this is why we think these things oftentimes fail. We can help you to improve the conditions under which those projects actually have to work, right? So if, for example, my theory, and it's hard to validate because the MIT report was really bad at giving you data and telling you, how they got to these 95% and why they failed. But my theory is that in part they failed because they probably also had bad APIs to work with, right? They didn't get the tools basically in place that would help them to build better AI applications. And if you don't have the right tools to build your applications with, then the likelihood of success goes down. So I don't know whether that's true, but what we're doing is pointing out and having opinions around some of these things where we think these are relevant factors in whether your AI engagement will succeed or not succeed, or has a higher likelihood of succeeding. And that's kind of our plan on how we want to help organizations, on the one hand, with these very relatively small concrete steps, and also build up trust so that they believe us and that they think, okay, that's useful, because it's hard, right? And going into enterprise land as a startup is not, as you know, I'm sure, it's not the easiest thing to do, right? So you really have to think, and I'm sure you know all these things, right? So one thing that I really like is this idea of product-led growth, right? So that you lead with small things that deliver value. You make sure that people learn about them, use them, you make it easy to use them, and then you can get feedback, and it also gives you great feedback for how to improve products, right? So that's the strategy we're following.
Yeah. Well, one thing, and then I follow a bunch of people in the API space. For example, the likes of Kin Lane and Kevin Swiber and others. Also you. And one theme I keep seeing is, and it's like almost like you guys have kind of, I don't know, you kind of conclude this in a way that, or you have all like converged obviously to like a very common ground. And this one theme I keep seeing is, if you have to put work into good API design, and if you don't do that, APIs, it will never really work. Like you cannot automate this, you cannot generate good APIs not from your database or something. And it really just takes work. And what I hear from you and others is like topics like API design and governance, and you really have to step up and make an investment. But yeah, maybe we can just hear your take live on that.
You're right.
Okay, this show is sufficient. Thank you.
Yeah. No, I mean, like you said, right? I think over time and that's maybe, because people like Kin and Kevin, right? They've been around for a very long time. They've seen things, and I mean, you see so many organizations, right, that tell you, and that was part, or a big part actually, of my job at Axway, was to go to organizations who think that just using APIs, right? Like we buy a gateway and we start using APIs and then we'll become Amazon or whatever, right? And then you had to kind of very clearly tell them that no, this is the beginning of your journey, not the end point. Right now you have to think about which APIs do we have and what do we build with those, and how do we help people to better build with things, right? And that was really important because, in particular, when both, like I worked at CA before and then at Axway, right? So like in all large organizations, they switched at some point from regular software licenses to subscription models, right? And at that point, you really need to worry a lot about customer success, right? If your customer has to renew nearly yearly at non-trivial amounts, they will really revisit that every time, right? And think, do we get the value out of that we thought we will? So you have to kind of really set the expectations right and also help them to succeed. And I think there is really no way around that, because in the end, I mean, APIs, even though, as we all know, being in that space for a long time, right? I mean, the term is very technical, but when we talk about APIs, most of us, I would say, we really talk more about business capabilities, right? Like some kind of thing that is made available in a digital way, and I can kind of play around with it, use it, reuse it, recombine it, whatever it takes, right? And that kind of alignment with the business side is really hard, right? A lot of organizations are not set up to do that well, so they end up with these relatively bad API landscapes that technically are APIs, but are still not really helping them a lot with velocity, right? Like whenever they want to implement something, it still becomes this really hard effort of trying to find out where I do get the data and how to combine these things and where I can even get access to that thing that probably should be accessible. And I think that hard work basically of turning your organization into something that works well at a digital level, that is what like a lot of the stuff in API land, so to speak, is all about, right? It's not the pure mechanics. It's really kind of making sure that what happens is well aligned with how the business functions and what the business goals are. And that's, I don't think that will ever go away. That's just the hard, I mean, the fundamentally the hard part of building a business that functions well, right? It's that, and that's not even specific for the digital space, right? I mean, any business, even if it does very, very physical things, right? Like building a good business that builds things in a good way is not easy. It's relatively tricky to get right, actually.
You know Conway's law, and sometimes we make jokes about it, and people ship the org chart. If we focus specifically on API design, have you seen organizations kind of like heavily influencing their API design through their communication structure, or do you have like interesting examples of how organizational structure and how people communicate and who doesn't communicate? Have you seen that influence API design?
Yeah. I think one of the things I've seen in the last couple of years, and I think they just came up at their 5th anniversary, I think, and they came up with a second edition of their book, is Team Topologies, right? The book by Manuel Paich and Matthew Skelton. And I think that book has actually changed the landscape a fair bit, right? It has been very, very influential and visible because it has, and I don't mean that in a negative way, right? But it has a very simple model. It's easy to grasp, right? It's just 14 types and different ways of how they interact, right? But it tells a very compelling story of this is probably how you can decouple teams in the best possible way. There always will be some coupling, right? Some team will need to use what another team is building. But the exercise always is to try to minimize that coupling, right? What we call loose coupling in API land, and then you call that different names in different spaces. But I think team topologies has really made a big impact there, because it kind of has taken the message of Conway's law to some extent, I would say, and packaged it up in a way that clearly was very well digestible for a lot of organizations, right? And they have had tremendous success. I mean, I'm really, really impressed by, I mean, the book is good, but I have to admit, I'm also very impressed just by how they rolled it out, right? It was really, but it's a great publisher, right? So they do a great job of really making sure they only publish a few books, but high quality books, and they really take care of that book getting the best possible impact. They've done a really terrific job with that. And I think that's one of the big examples. And whenever, I mean, I used to, not any longer, but for quite a while, when I went to organizations, I would always ask them, right, have you heard of team topologies? And in the beginning, very few had. By now, it's kind of like, yeah. But and I think that's really something that has had quite an influence. And this whole idea, like platform teams, that like the whole structure, I think, is really just has changed the way how many organizations look at kind of these alignment of organizational structures on and the stuff they're trying to build.
Interesting. Well, one thing I wanted to get back to is we talked a little bit about like your past and startups, and we're also a startup. We know the startup game, and we're I would say not primarily, but we sell a lot to enterprise, and getting to customers like eBay and others. It took us quite some time to bring the company to a place where you actually have access to these kind of companies, where you have access to banks and big names. And I'm curious, in your past career, like with Axway, I guess you always had the luxury of, you could probably talk to everybody, like Axway, big name in the Magic Quadrant, and you have a very strong brand. With Jentic, you're now part of a young startup, of a smaller player. And how does it change the game for you? Is it like, are you missing something, or how do you look at it?
Well, I mean, of course, there's not that machinery in the back that we had at Axway, right, where you would have like all over the world, right? You had different people working with different companies and having a lot of established contacts, and of course we don't have that. But I mean, to be very frank, we also hired Frank. So I joined 2 months ago, right? And then Frank Kilcommons joined basically 1 or 2 weeks, I think, after I did. And I mean, it definitely also was a reason that we were hired, because we have a pretty good network, right? So we are kind of well known. So that gives a little bit of credibility, at least, to the company, right? That's just how it is, right? People trust people. That's very normal. And of course, it's still different just walking around and saying, "Hi, I'm from a startup in Dublin," right? Please listen to me. But that's why in the end now we're kind of going this product-led growth path, right? Where we say we just need to have something we can show. And Frank and I mean, we can help with opening a couple of doors, having initial conversations. But in the end, we have to show that if you work together with us, right, you'll get some relatively concrete benefits pretty early on, right? We'll work with you on that, and then we can follow up. So that's something where we just have to kind of do the hard work and talk to people and hope that some of them will think that what we're telling them makes sense and helps them, and then we can take it from there. But yeah, it's of course it's very different, but I don't think I need to tell you that. It's you've been doing that for quite a while, so.
That's true. Speaking of value, speaking of the product, one thing you mentioned earlier is you mentioned the term AI ready. So if I want to leverage AI, my APIs, they need to be AI ready. And you said you're working on that, and you help customers achieve that. So what does it actually mean to make AIs to make APIs AI ready? And what would you say in organizations are currently the biggest blockers to actually be ready for AI?
Great question, Jens. I was just actually going to ask this one to interrupt, so I'm happy you got to it. But I am
Well,
really
I'm back
curious
to
on
the
your
script.
yeah, but I'm actually really curious because you mentioned in the beginning, like helping companies when you were doing your pitch about the company be AI ready. So I'm curious, what does that actually mean?
It seems to me that we're 40 minutes in, and now we started going through the script. So let's see how this is going.
Do you have an extra 2 hours after this, by the way?
Welcome to WunderGraph.
Yeah, this will become. I don't know what the length. I think to YouTube you can upload like 40 hours or something. So we're
Perfect.
good.
We have time.
Yeah. No, AI ready. So there are two main things. So I would say one of the things that you often see that APIs are in many organizations kind of too low level, right? They're kind of very fine grained, and that oftentimes makes it hard, in particular if you look at stuff like MCP, right? Makes it really hard to understand what all of these different things do and how to combine them into meaningful interactions, right? So, and the fine-grained part actually bites you two ways. So it bites you because you then end up with many more endpoints and operations, right? So you create a much bigger surface that is there, and as we all know, LLMs still have problems with context and focus, right, at some point. So by increasing your surface, that creates a problem in itself. And the other thing is that LLMs oftentimes have a problem to really understand how to combine these endpoints then into meaningful workflows, right? So that's the second thing, is that that business alignment that we were also talking about a little bit earlier, right? Where ideally you would want to have APIs that are business aligned, right? Where you would say, what do I need to do to onboard a customer with these and those things, and then kick off some process, right? So that ideally would be one thing I can ask for, and then it kicks off a workflow that does all the things, instead of me having to do those 30 things in the right order manually, right? So at that level, AI readiness really means that you start to reduce the number of endpoints that you have, and you start to improve kind of the business alignment, the intent-based nature of APIs, so that a workflow that wants to do a thing ideally just needs one tool to do that, right? And then that's the third thing where we also are working at addressing that part, is if you have a large organization, right? We were just talking with somebody who they have like an API management product in some large car manufacturer, right? And that car manufacturer, they have 50,000 APIs, right? And if you have 50,000 APIs, you probably have 500,000 endpoints, right? So it's a lot, right? So that also means that if you now want to figure out how to solve a problem, you need to find the right endpoint to do that, or the right endpoints, right? And the big difference, and I think that's something that a lot of people don't yet appreciate enough, the big difference is that if you are a human developer, you search for APIs and then you write your application, right? It's a relatively slow, and it's a design time process, right? You hard code basically the APIs that you use into your application, and then your application does what it needs to do, hopefully. With agents, right, that's much more a runtime thing. So you have an agent that discovers it needs to do something, and then it needs to find the tools in order to do that thing, right? So that's like a runtime thing where you don't just look for APIs when you're writing an app. You kind of look for APIs every time you solve a problem. So in that point, right, you also need like a very differently structured capabilities to look for those things, because agents just have a very different behavior than traditional applications where everything is hard-coded in the application and stays like this for quite a while. So I think there are all these bits and pieces coming together. And yeah, I mean, what we're trying to do is at least make people aware of the fact that these things matter, right? And hopefully we have a solution that people find compelling. But at the very least, I would say these are problems that you have to address in some shape or form. And if we can provide something that people find interesting, that's great. But yeah, that's how we look at that space in particular, where I think people only now are discovering, for example, the scalability problem, right? Like just for the last couple of months, basically, right? You did see that after the initial wave of MCP wonderfulness, people now realize that, if I have too many tools, right, like MCP won't really work that well. I have to think about what to do, right? And it's not that I don't think that's a shortcoming of MCP. It's just like that was never the goal of MCP, was to work with a landscape of 50,000 tools, right?
Yeah, that's a very interesting point, because you mentioned MCP a couple of times, and
We have to.
you know, yeah, like of course, for at least for SEO reasons. But
Yes.
you know, so I joined the API party a little bit late, like way after, like, you know, hypermedia and other things were a thing. But the one thing that always fascinated me was it really was the idea of hypermedia. And when I first read about it, you know, like it speaks about like an agent, and it can go to a URL, and the URL can return hypertext, and it tells you about what is possible, and here's some content, and then maybe gives you some links to do something else. And when I first saw agents, I was like, wow, like this is the moment for hypermedia. This sounds like hypermedia was built for agents. They can, yeah, agents can just explore the thing. But then you're wondering, because, you know, hypermedia APIs and OpenAPI, it's not exactly like the same thing. And like you said, OpenAPI, it's very much built for humans to, at build time, to create applications that then integrate with that OpenAPI thing. And now we have a completely new problem. We have the agent, we have 50,000 APIs, and the agent can't just look at 50,000 API endpoints, or like even if it's just a couple hundred, and try to explore what is possible. And like you said earlier, API design, it's about capabilities. So I'm just curious, if I'm the car maker, if I have 50,000 APIs or 500,000 endpoints, like what is the strategy to give AI or agents any way of doing something meaningful with that, or even like being a little bit more the challenger? Is that even the right approach? Does it even make sense? Because, you know, there's companies like Cloudflare. I assume you have read the article, who said, well, MCP, maybe that's the wrong approach. A better approach could be, we have like a TypeScript SDK, and we, because LLMs are good at writing code, and we essentially package up our capabilities in some TypeScript functions, and then we ask the model to figure out what functions to call. But even then, it's also not possible to stick 50,000 descriptions of tools into code and then have an AI read that and figure out like what are the function calls. So coming back to the car maker, I have the 50,000 APIs, like what's the strategy to use AI, and does it even make sense?
You tend to ask really simple questions. Just stop using AI. It's not gonna work. I don't really have like a perfect answer for that, and I think that that is such a loaded question in so many ways where it would be really hard to unpack in a complete way. But I think there are some interesting trends that you can observe, right? So one trend that you see now is that kind of knowledge management to some extent makes a little bit of a comeback, right? Where it becomes more important probably to describe your domain so that you have a good vocabulary for actually describing what your API does, because you may imagine that some agent wants to find out, right? And they're very much focused on human language. So things such as, I think, I haven't seen that really much in that context, but I'm guessing that things such as DDD, domain-driven design, right, can help with that in the sense that they allow us to better describe what we have. Because in the end, like we discussed before, it's about kind of the business level capabilities, right? Like what does that thing mean at the business level? And there is, I'm sure, right, with these car manufacturers, just words such as product, right? There means 80 different things, right? Depending on which part of the organization you talk to. So they will have to figure out what exactly that means and come up with a language that you can safely use that is well defined. I think in the end, it's going to be, much more at the level of knowledge engineering, right? So we will have to be more careful with how we represent knowledge, how we write it down, right? So now you see that people start putting more and more information in some kind of markdown format, which almost, I think they almost assume it like has magical properties because it's structured. But I mean, to me, it's the same when it came up, like the whole prompt engineering thing. I have to admit that drove me a little bit insane, right? Because it felt almost like it was like a black art, right? Like zero engineering, zero kind of any kind of patterns behind it, right? Everybody had just their own way of this is how my prompt works really well. And if you were tweaking it, there were no ways to really find out, is it better now or just different, right? And I think that's something where we're still learning a lot. And that's also why I think that in the end, we will still do a lot with regular code, because that's just how a lot of processes just need to work a certain way, because we decided that's how we want them to work. And then we will just write code and then it works that way, period, right? There's no need for transitioning everything to AI. So I think in the end, if we have like these better ways of how we can then say, okay, and here we need a little bit AI, and here a little bit, and here a little bit. And then also this whole question of how do I give the AI the best out of these 500,000 endpoints, right, becomes a little bit more manageable, because I probably don't want and need an AI that works across the whole organization, right? I will probably need, here's my customer service API, here's my partner management API, here's my fault analysis AI. And then those can work with like much more delimited areas where probably the question of finding the right tools becomes a little less of a problem. It's probably still a problem. But yeah, in my mind, I think really trying to delineate those things as well as possible will help a lot. But yeah, that's basically a very, very long-winded way of saying, I don't really know where this will end up. But
Yeah,
it's going to be interesting to find out.
it's interesting to see this from your perspective. We are also looking in this direction from a GraphQL angle, and I would say the funny thing here is you do all this modern development and everything. And what we have figured out is, so first of all, GraphQL is very interesting in that you don't have like endpoints, and then you have to figure out what is the capability of an endpoint. You have this graph, and in the graph, every field can have meaning, and you need to figure out, if you have a prompt, what kind of query could I send to this graph to do the thing I want to do. And the funny part is, what we have figured out quite early is, when you try to build a system that can take a prompt and it tells you what is the query that helps you solve this prompt or solve this issue, the first problem you run into is, you need a graph, but we can also go like one level meta, and we can say you need an API that is well described. And the problem here is, if you have APIs with fields that are named in a very similar way, and the descriptions are very meaningless, like the field is name and the description is this is the name, and now you do semantic search, and you will have a lot of names in your API, in your graph, and you end up with, well, we don't really know what to do.
Yeah.
So for us, the realization is, if you want to enable LLMs to do something with your APIs, the first step is good descriptions and good design. And sorry, but it's the hard truth.
I have a question there though, for both of you. Just Eric, one thing I want to highlight though, it's whenever you talk with an expert or somebody that has experience in the field, they always answer questions with, "Well, it depends," and then they go into their case, just the way that you did, because you can
This
tell
is
who an expert is, and the same thing with the ends. But let's go back to the car example. These cars manufacture, I don't know, they've been around for 50, 60 years. They have these 50,000 APIs. How would they go and fix the design of those 50,000 APIs? How do they fix something that they've been building on top of? And you can think of it kind of as like a mountain of trash, like not very good APIs, and then not many good, and not many good. But the company's still operating. But how do we fix this problem if I already have 50,000 badly designed APIs? And this is a question for both of you, by the way.
Well, I would not let you in front of that customer if you greeted them with, "Hey, let's fix your mountain of trash."
I thought you were German. I thought you were German.
No, he's
No,
he's from
I see your point.
Swiss.
So
Oh,
the
that's why
question
he's
is
neutral.
twofold, actually, right? And I mean, both are really important things. So on the one hand, yes, descriptions are really important. So let's just focus on description for now, right? So that's one of the reasons, for example, why we, as one of the first things that we do, we have our own kind of scoring mechanism that looks at descriptions and also looks at kind of tries to really figure out whether these descriptions are as bad as you just said, Jens, right? Where it would say, well, this the description here, that's the description, right? And the name is the name. So we try to kind of really try to make sure that those things are really differentiating things, which is not easy to do, but it is important. But as you said, right, it's also very clear that if you have badly designed APIs, good descriptions can only get you so far, right? So, and that's where that's for us, that's actually 3 steps from there. But where we then come with that workflow idea where we say, look, you have your APIs typically tend to be too fine-grained, right, or too technical, like these kind of not greatly designed APIs. So instead of even exposing those to AI, let's put some workflows on top of those, which are well described, right, are more at the business level, and then those will be the things that AI actually gets exposed. And the actual APIs then are kind of hidden. And this, I mean, this goes back, I'm sure you know that, right? Like this good old model that MuleSoft has had for the longest time, right? Like the system APIs, and then the process APIs, and then the experience APIs, right? And I mean, you can call these layers however you like, but I mean, the story, we could never say that this is a good story to tell because I never worked at MuleSoft, right? And you cannot point at a competitor's model and say, hey, that's a good idea. But it's very natural to do it that way, right? And that for us is kind of in order to kind of build something on that trash that is a little better, right? I think that workflow layer actually makes a lot of sense, right? And that's where that's at least that's our bet.
Yeah. So it's kind of like I have my fine-grained APIs. You put like a BFF on top to give us a more high-level API, more capability-focused API, and with that we build workflows on top. Which, by the way, it's not such a bad idea because it also means we benefit from all the abstraction here. We can swap out the backend. We can modernize the backend. The workflow stays alive. So that's also a benefit, right?
Yeah, and also the workflow. It's not just for AI, right? Like anybody can use the workflow. So like a regular developer also might say, oh, that's actually much easier for me to do, right? Instead of actually writing code to use those 15 underlying APIs, I now actually have a better API to work with. So that's what I choose. And that's also part of like our strategy a little bit, that we try to say, hey, what we're doing is improving the AI readiness of your landscape, but it's also improving your landscape in general, right? It's good for everybody. It's just good hygiene, so to speak, but good hygiene with an AI twist, so to speak.
No,
I just had to laugh because there was this magic moment when some people realized you could even use curl and call an MCP server, because guess what, MCP, it's an API again, and yeah, turtles all the way.
Differently, like some trashy turtles further down, better turtles further up.
Awesome.
Cool. Okay. When we spoke in the beginning, you said don't occupy me forever. So we also want
I'm
to
getting hungry.
you're getting okay, great. So let me and Stefan, you can shoot one more if you like, but my last question, if I look at the well, we kind of skipped the script, but just curious, what's your bold prediction for the future?
Generally
What's going to happen?
speaking,
Well, let's not talk politics, but let's stay in the API realm.
okay, good. Thanks for limiting that a little bit. That makes
Yes.
it easier. Yeah, I think I think it's in the not too distant future. Nobody really knows when, right? But I think the AI bubble will deflate at least a little bit, and but we will still, I think, use AI in more and more places. And I think understanding this different mode of consumption, like the things we discussed, right? Like AI needs more things at runtime. It works in slightly different ways. It probably also needs things at a little different level. I think that is going to keep us busy for a little while, I would say. But in the end, I mean, like you said, right? Like APIs will still be APIs. So yeah, no revolution in sight. Just interesting little changes along.
Even in 2026, GraphQL will still not kill REST.
It would be a surprise.
Yes. No, it's not going to happen. We need all these fine-grained APIs, and this is the funny, we're talking. So we are the graphical guys. We're talking to an expert for I would say APIs in general, but obviously also REST APIs. And the first thing you tell us is many REST APIs are like too fine-grained, and they're not so well designed, but yeah, I think that's just a general nature of like people try to solve problems, they build APIs, and they try their best. But yeah, Stefan,
I mean,
your last
I'm
question.
sure, just interrupting here, but I'm sure you also have seen. I can't really wrap my mind around it exactly, but I could imagine, coming from the GraphQL world, if you look into some of the schemas that people are defining, that also maybe sometimes it may not really be all that great, right? Where you also say, yeah, that's GraphQL, but that's not what you're supposed to do with it.
Yeah, it's an interesting like we will not fully unfold this box of
Yeah, yeah,
worms today, but one thing that is super fascinating is so our focus is not exactly GraphQL, it's more like GraphQL Federation. So essentially you take a graph and you actually split it up into smaller chunks, and the super interesting part is people come up with the craziest ideas of how to do this kind of splitting. And what happens in the end is, we have this thing, we call it router. Others would say it's an API gateway. So you send a query to the router, and the router has to then unpack with the craziest graph you can imagine. Well, what could be an efficient way to fetch all that data from all these different subgraphs and then mesh it all together? And yeah, sometimes that can really be a very long and hurtful process. And what you find there is that, again, we're back to, because we actually think we're not so much solving a technical problem. We kind of realized over the years we're solving an organizational problem. And the funny thing is, you have people, they organize in teams, and teams build subgraphs, and then you have clients who want data, and there's like a mismatch between what clients actually want and how the team structure looks like, how that influences the subgraphs, and then you have inefficient query patterns. And that's like a very interesting space. Like, on the one side you have the people and they organize in teams and they create architecture, and then you have different use cases. And yeah, we are in between. And this is like, asking you in the beginning, this is, for me, it is the interesting part, how we can help people essentially build better APIs and better cluster their APIs into, like, not too many small subgraphs, but maybe,
yeah,
Netflix figured out 350 subgraphs are too many. Maybe we should just have a single one per team, and they definitely don't have 350 teams. So yeah, that is our space, and we also find it interesting. But the thing is, and this is something like, couple years ago I was like, oh, GraphQL is the best thing in the world, it's better than REST. I also grew up a little bit, and what you realize in the end of the at the end of the day, GraphQL or REST, it actually doesn't matter so much. What matters is, how can you help people with good design, with good structure, and all these kind of things. And yeah, we can send a post request with a query, or we can send a get. It's,
yeah.
it, that
And
is not so
you can
important.
screw up in any technology, right?
Yes.
I think that's what you always see. Okay,
Okay,
Stefan,
cool.
what's your question?
Yeah, I don't want to hold you too long. So the only question
No,
that I
hit
was
me.
okay. Are you sure? Because I had one to end the podcast, but I'll make it simple.
Jacob said we should do the hit fire, and then we the rapid fire, and then
Yeah,
we end it.
just don't ask a Jens question. It's like, where do you see the business of?
Yeah, come on.
Yeah.
Ask Erik something simple.
How do you explain an API to a non-technical person? What is your go-to example?
My go-to example typically is a weather service. It's very simple. I think very easy to understand. There's useful information there. You might want to get information about different things. So you want to maybe have it displayed in different ways. You may want to read it in your card. Like, there are many different ways how you want to get that information. There has to be a well-identified way of how you can get that information from those who have that data, and that's what APIs allow you to do.
Okay, last quick one. What is something that people get wrong about APIs today that bothers you?
People get wrong. Yeah,
It wasn't my question. This is Jacob. Okay, we just ended here. It's fine.
Yeah, I think it's still, they jump too quickly to, even when you tell them design the API, they think about, well, should I do a get or a post, right? Instead of thinking, what is actually the capability that I'm designing, right? Like, more not the technical design, but really, what are you trying to enable? Like, what should somebody do with the thing you're designing there. And I think that the design aspect still oftentimes is seen as mostly a technical exercise. I think that is something where we still get a lot of bad APIs out of this, right? Who actually may use get and post in the right way, but they're just still bad APIs.
Yeah, cool. Okay, Erik, this was fun. Thanks for joining us. Stefan, closing remarks.
Last funny question is, Erik, where can the viewers find you? That one is simple. Where can they find you? Are you on LinkedIn, Twitter? What's the best way to get in contact with you?
Yeah, so LinkedIn and YouTube. These are kind of I quit Twitter, X a while ago. So yeah, LinkedIn, YouTube. I have a YouTube channel. It's called Getting APIs to Work. Check it out. I try to create more videos now. I had a little bit of a dry spell there. But yeah, these are my two main outlets.
Perfect. Well, thank you again so much for joining us, and we will see you in API Days Paris, December 8th. So can't wait to meet in person.
Great. Yeah, looking forward to it. And thanks for having me. That was a lot of fun. It was definitely a lot of off-script stuff, but that's the best kind of podcast.
Awesome.
Well
Thanks,
said.
Erik.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.